Good afternoon, everybody. It's really great to see you all, even though I don't see you. I know that you're there, and that's very comforting. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick. Tonight, we are thrilled to host Wolf Blitzer, certainly one of the most impersonated newsmen on television and a particular favorite of Saturday Night Live. But tonight's topic is not funny. It's quite serious. He will be in conversation with Madeleine about fake news and the media's role in combating misinformation. I welcome you to tonight's America at a Crossroads program on behalf of Jews United and community advocates. And on behalf of our leadership team, Zev Yaroslavsky, former Congressman Mel Levine, Rabbi Ken Chazen, Caroline Kelly, David Lair, and myself. Thank you to our many wonderful co-sponsors. You saw their names posted at the outset of the program. We have some amazing programs coming up. Next week, David Brooks will return to finish off March. He won't finish off March, but who's coming after him will. Jennifer Kavanaugh of the RAND Corporation and Jennifer Rubin of the Washington Post will be talking about truth decay and the future of our democracy. Save the date of April 7th. We will have a very exciting guest to announce in the next couple of days. The rest of April will bring Fareed Zakaria and other great speakers. While we are planning a rash of great May programs, do mark your calendars for Thursday, June 3rd, when we will welcome Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who has provoked Trump's ire for having voted in favor of impeachment and who will share his thoughts about the future of the Republican Party. You can sign up for all these programs via the links that come to you right after tonight's program. Today is auspicious. A year ago today, the world as we knew it came to a screeching halt. Since then, more than 500,000 Americans have died of coronavirus, and I know for a fact some of those whom we have lost were friends and relatives of people in our audience tonight. We mourn those losses. We also mark the tremendous progress we are making in getting our country vaccinated. It does feel like the light at the end of this particular tunnel is getting brighter. Now, to introduce our guest tonight, please welcome my dear friend and a critical member of our leadership team, Zev Yaroslavsky.
Thank you very much, Janice, and David. Thank you for all the work you do to make this possible. Tonight, we're honored to have world-renowned broadcast journalist Wolf Blitzer. Wolf and I have a few things in common. We both graduated with bachelor's degrees in 1971 and master's degrees in 72. We are both named after our grandfathers. Zev is Hebrew for wolf, and that's where the comparison ends. We go back a long way, and I'm proud to call him a friend, and thank you, Wolf, for agreeing to do this and be with us as our guest tonight. Wolf Blitzer was born in Augsburg, Germany. His parents were Polish-Jewish refugees from the German-occupied Poland. He was raised in Buffalo, New York, where he received his BA in history at the State University of New York in Buffalo. He then received his MA in International Relations from the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University. He began his career in journalism in the early 1970s in the Tel Aviv bureau of the Reuters news agency, and then became the Washington correspondent for the Jerusalem Post. He remained with the Post until 1990, when he was hired by CNN as the network's military affairs reporter. His award-winning coverage of the first Gulf War in Kuwait made him a household name. In 1992, he became CNN's White House correspondent, and the ensuing years, he also hosted any number of flagship programs on the network, including Situation Room, his widely watched evening show that he currently hosts. Wolf has written two noteworthy books. First, Between Washington and Jerusalem, a reporter's notebook, and Territory of Lies, about the Jonathan Pollard affair. He has covered virtually every major political story for CNN over the last 3 decades, and we are so honored to have him here tonight. We are also blessed to have award-winning radio personality Madeleine as our interlocutor again tonight. Madeleine has hosted and reported for a wide array of highly acclaimed NPR and NPR affiliates for more than 30 years. She has a master's degree from Columbia Graduate School of Journalism, where she also taught documentary radio. She is one of our most beloved moderators, who is well known to and appreciated by this America at a Crossroads audience. So Madeleine, I'll turn it over to you and to Wolf.
Zev, thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's so great to be back with you as another fascinating program is about to ensue, I'm sure. And Wolf, what you and I have in common is my first job was in Buffalo. So I know Buffalo pretty well.
What was your job? What was your job in Buffalo?
I worked at a public radio station at SUNY Buffalo.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah,
good.
WPFO, which
All
Terry
right.
Gross
It's a-
also,
It's a great station.
yeah.
Yeah.
And learned a little bit about jazz along the way. So anyway, let's just dive in. The title of this program is Fact versus Fiction, the media's role in combating misinformation. A lot of people think the media has a role in spreading misinformation, especially in the last several years. So I'm wondering what you think about that. Where do you see the media's role in the positive side and on the negative side in terms of misinformation?
My own attitude is, and it's been my attitude ever since I was a journalist, when I just started off as a journalist working for the Reuters news agency, and I was trained by a bunch of older British journalists, was we got to report the news. We got to report the facts. We got to do it fairly. We got to do it honestly. We got to do it responsibly. It's great to be first with a major story. It's great to have a scoop, but it's more important to be accurate. It's more important to be precise and to be responsible. And if you're going to report something that's negative about somebody, make sure you give that individual or that group, that organization, a chance to respond before you put it on the air or you print it, because once it's out there, it's gonna hurt that person. It's gonna smear that person, even if it turns out to be not necessarily 100% accurate. So you gotta make sure that before you report something like that, you do everything you can to get that individual or that organization a chance to respond. Sometimes the response will be so compelling, you won't put it on the air, you won't report it, you won't put it in a newspaper, or you won't put it on the radio if it's really compelling. On the other hand, sometimes it'll just be the fourth or fifth paragraph in a story denying it, and then you move on and report what you think you have, which is accurate and precise. At CNN, we have an extensive organization of people, from our standards and practices department to our lawyers, to the editorial brass, that whenever there's something that is based on anonymous sources, let's say, even if there's 2 or 3 or a dozen, they go through it very, very carefully to make sure it's worthy of CNN's reputation. Because if we report something that's inaccurate or false, eventually, when we discover it was inaccurate or false, we'll correct it, and we'll do that as quickly as we possibly can, which every serious news organization will do, and issue a formal correction. On the other hand, we don't want to have to do that. So that's why we have been trained all of these years, and I'm approaching 31 years now at CNN. That we are very, very cautious. Now, that's CNN, and I'm very proud of what we do. But as your question suggests, there are other news organizations that are not necessarily as thorough and as responsible, as diligent in making sure that what they report is factually accurate. And that's a problem, because there are millions of people who are watching or listening or reading, and they'll believe it, even if it's not true. But I can only speak for CNN, and I can say that we try to be as responsible and as fair as we possibly can.
However, what one organization does may taint the entire pool of journalism. There's a gross level of mistrust throughout the public of the media. And I'm wondering if what another news organization does is affecting the reputation of other news organizations such as yourselves, CNN, other mainstream news organizations, in trying to walk that line where we're in a news environment where a lot of opinion is being thrown around and a lot of misinformation, as we're discussing, is being thrown around and not corrected and not fact checked, creating the overall sense that the media is not to be trusted.
Well, the country right now, as you know, is very, very politically divided. And a lot of people, they only want to listen to what they already, believe, what they already support. They don't want to get other opinions. They don't want to get other views. And there's a lot of name calling out there. And as a result, there's a lot of distrust of what we call the mainstream news media, because there are people out there who don't like us. And I can just point out, as everybody knows, over the past 4 years, when Trump was president, he made it almost a daily routine for him to talk about the fake news, talk about the mainstream media as the enemy of the American people, which was very painful for me as a Washington correspondent for many years, to hear a president of the United States speak like that about the news media. It was pretty awful. But he didn't stop. He's still doing it, by the way, now. And he has a lot of supporters. Millions of people voted for him. He lost the election, but still he did really well in terms of generating a lot of support. And a lot of those people obviously believe what he's saying, and that has undermined our credibility, at least with a lot of those folks. And it's a problem.
Yeah, and I mean, it's hard not to also look at how CNN has adapted in the last 4 years to that, and has taken on in some of its shows, and mainly in the primetime slots, a kind of a more adversarial approach to Trump and to his, fellow supporters in Congress. And I'm wondering how CNN calibrates that with what you just said at the opening, with the desire to remain fact-based and, down the middle in your reporting, while also having this other side in the primetime hours, which takes on a much more opinion-based adversarial approach.
I would describe it more like a newspaper, where you have the front page, you have the news pages, which are reporting the news as factually and as accurately as they possibly can, as opposed to the editorial page and the op-ed page, where you have editorial writers expressing very strong opinions about all sorts of important issues. You have columnists who express their opinions in very strong ways. You have op-ed people who contribute articles which are very, very tough, very, very opinionated. But I would say this: the news reporters, whether for the LA Times or the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, serious journalists. But I would also say that the editorial writers for those newspapers are also serious journalists. Whether it's the editorial page editor or a lead editorial writer or a columnist, I think all of us will agree that people like Tom Friedman, who's a columnist for the New York Times, who expresses his opinion very strongly, is a serious journalist. And he tries to be even though he's expressing his views, he tries to be as factual and as responsible as he can be. So, there are different kinds of journalists out there. Some are willing to really go out and express their opinions a lot more than others. If you watch The Situation Room, my show, it's largely, a very serious news show that reports the news. We have our reporters reporting what's going on. We have our analysts. We have newsmakers who we invite on to give us their views. And we try to do that in our way. So I think it's the responsible way for news organizations to operate.
But then you have the other shows, not yours necessarily, but Chris Cuomo's show, for example, Don Lemon's show, or even Anderson Cooper sometimes, delving into the more kind of opinion-based, not afraid of saying what they think. Do you think that is that something that you are okay with, or is that something that is debated behind the scenes at CNN?
No, I'm totally okay with it. And I think our viewers know who they are. They know what they're going to get. And I don't have a problem with Don Lemon or Chris Cuomo or Anderson, if he wants to do it, expressing some very, very strong opinions, because they're all serious journalists and they've got a lot of background in that area. And if that's what they feel comfortable doing, that's fine with me.
But you don't feel comfortable doing that?
I don't do it. Once in a while, I'll do it. Because I was raised in beautiful Buffalo, New York, as you know, as a news junkie. Even when I was a little kid, my mom and dad would watch the news. We'd watch Walter Cronkite every night. We talk about it over dinner. Even when I was a young boy, my older sister and I, we became fascinated with the news, not only news in the United States, but around the world. And that's what I grew up, watching and seeing. And that was the way I've been trained as a journalist all these years, just to report the news. So I'm not going to be opening my show with a 10-minute, monologue on something. I give the headlines. I go right to our lead reporter, Caitlin Collins is over at the White House. Let's check in. President Biden today, blah, blah, blah. And we'll get the news on. And I think that's why people want to watch my show. Now, other journalists have different views, and that's fine. And but my attitude is I want to do what I'm comfortable doing and what I've been trained to do, and I have a history of doing all these years.
Have you ever been pressured to give your opinion or to be more like the other shows?
No, I've never been. CNN, and as I say, I've been here almost 31 years. On May 8th, it'll be 31 years I've been at CNN, and no one has ever said, you got to start off, do this or that or whatever. They trust me. They're all responsible, and I really feel blessed that I've got a leadership from Jeff Zucker, the president of CNN on down, who give me that leeway to do what I'm comfortable doing, what I want to do. And they also give other journalists at CNN, other journalists have different attitudes, but that's fine.
Well, how was it? Just if you could describe it, how it felt to be, as you indicated a little bit, but I want you to amplify it a little bit, how it felt to be on the receiving end of so much vitriol from the White House in the last 4 years.
Well, we got used to it after a while, but it was pretty stark to hear that. I've covered a lot of presidents. I've interviewed every sitting president, going back to Jimmy Carter when he was president, and then Ronald Reagan, and George H.W. Bush, and Bill Clinton, and George Bush, and Barack Obama. Every sitting president has given me and other CNN journalists, interviews while they were president of the United States. Trump is the first president who never gave us an interview as president. Now, before he was president, when he was a business guy in New York, I used to go up to New York, the Trump Tower, interview him all the time. And that was that. But after he became president, he wanted to do interviews almost exclusively with conservative or, like Fox News. That's where, he did a lot of he did other, occasional interviews with the broadcast networks. But I could be wrong, but I don't think he gave CNN an interview. Now, he did invite us.
That's for sure. He didn't give NPR an interview, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, he did when he did a major speech before Congress, for example, a joint session of Congress, State of the Union address. He would always invite the TV anchors, the lead TV anchors, to the White House for an off-the-record background lunch, and I went to those, and I was always there, and it always was publicized because you couldn't keep something like that secret. And he would give us his thoughts about what was going on. He did invite us to that. And then at the end, he would usually give us a statement on the record to make it clear that we were at the White House for this luncheon with the president. By the way, he wasn't the only one. Every president that I've covered, whether it was Obama or Clinton or Bush, they would always have these, quote, background lunches with anchors, TV anchors, on a big day like a State of the Union address. So he did invite us to those, although I'm not sure the last one he did, he invited us to that one. I could be right. I don't think he did, but I'll check that. But in terms of a formal sit-down interview, we didn't have that. All the other presidents did that. And I see now President Biden, he's given Anderson Cooper a town hall, which he's already done. He did an interview with George Stephanopoulos on ABC this morning. He's going to have a news conference next week, his first formal White House news conference. I think it's next Thursday. So he's beginning the process. A little late for Biden to do this formal news conference. He's gotten some criticism, some heat from those of us in the news media. We want to see the president every week. We have a ton of questions. We want him or someday her to answer. But that's just because we're greedy journalists. We want access to everyone.
Mm-hmm. So, but in terms of how you felt as hosting your show and of being really the face of CNN and having Trump constantly criticize and attack CNN and encourage his supporters to, what did that mean behind the scenes for you and your colleagues? How did you decide?
We got used to it. And the only thing that bothered us was that he has so many supporters out there who would echo, what he was saying, and they would post it on social media, whether on Twitter or Instagram or whatever. And so you constantly got that kind of grief out there in the new world of social media. But I got used to it. I'm sure my other colleagues got used to it, and we didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it.
But you do have to pay attention to ratings, and the ratings have been lower since he's been out of office, right?
No, the ratings since the November election for CNN have been among the highest in the 40 years of CNN's history. Going back to 1980, June 1st, 1980, when Ted Turner founded CNN, I think our ratings in the last, in November, December, January, and February were amongst the highest that they've ever been in the 40 years of CNN's history. People tuned into CNN for the election and the aftermath of the election. We have a huge audience out there, and the ratings are still very, very strong. They really have not gone down to when Trump was president. The ratings for Fox News have gone down, but they're coming back a bit right now. But they did go down in the aftermath of the November election when Biden won.
So your ratings now are at the same level as they were during the during the election, during the in the aftermath of January 6th.
The ratings were great on election day and the immediate aftermath in December and January. And right now they've gone down a little bit, but they're still very, very strong. We're doing really well. January, I think, was one of our highest months. February was incredibly big. I don't study all the ratings all that closely, but I hear that, that we're doing really well.
So what he said was that without Trump, everyone would go out of business, pretty much.
Yeah.
Not true.
He said a lot of stuff. If you've noticed over the last several days, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, Wall Street, has been posting record highs. Today, for the first time ever, the Dow Jones closed above 33,000. That's a new all-time record high. It's like the fifth in a day that since Biden took office, that it's gone high. And I posted on Twitter today something to the effect, if you have a 401k, you're probably pretty happy right now. And the other day, I did a little mashup of Trump saying during the campaign, if Biden wins, you can forget about your 401k, you can forget about your money, the stock market will go, it'll be a disaster, it'll collapse, there won't be any money. But if you take a look at what's been going on over the past few weeks, including last week and now today, the Dow Jones is obviously very happy with the $1.9 trillion economic relief package that was passed by the Democrats in the House and the Senate. No Republican support. Very happy with the vaccine distribution and administration, people getting vaccines in huge numbers. They're obviously happy about that. They're happy with the Federal Reserve's decisions today. I think that's the main reason today why it reached this new all-time record high. So Trump is saying a lot of stuff that about our ratings, about the Dow Jones, about Wall Street, that didn't necessarily turn out to be true.
But are you planning for a kind of a floating back to normal when the initial rush of the first 100 days is over and things start to calm down? Biden is a lot of things, but he doesn't, make news at 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday night necessarily. He's pretty steady Eddie. How are you as a news organization, as a network, preparing for that? Kind of a less, addicting news cycle that people would have to tune in to see what the latest outrage was.
We thought that after the Biden win in November, that would begin to happen. But you know what has happened is that we're still in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic, and people are still being very cautious, as they should be, although some are beginning to throw away their masks, which is a huge awful blunder. And it's a huge story. It's in all the years I've been a journalist, this past year, what we've seen going on and what is still going on right now is arguably the biggest story of my career and a lot of journalists' career. And so this coronavirus pandemic is still out there. People are dying, and 1,500 a day are dying. 50,000 still are coming down with COVID. yes, millions of people are getting vaccinated, which is great. And millions either got a first dose or second, or fully vaccinated with 2 doses. But this is a huge story. What's going on in the world is a huge story right now. There's a new foreign policy emerging under President Biden, and all the political stuff is a huge story. So as much as you're right, we thought that there would be, a little bit more return to normal times. It's still been a crazy news cycle, and that's going on, and I suspect it's going to go on for a while.
Well, speaking of misinformation, disinformation, what do you see as your responsibility for combating a pretty sizable chunk of the population's belief that they shouldn't get the vaccine for various reasons? Lots of conspiracy theories about it. That, as you say, they shouldn't wear masks. I think something like half of all Republican men say they won't get the vaccine. Do you
I think it's really disturbing when you see that. And I was happy in that Fox News interview that former President Trump did with Maria Bartiromo yesterday. He finally said, yes, the vaccines are important. Go get a vaccine. He didn't participate in that public service announcement that all the other former living presidents did, which I think was a huge mistake, because so many of his supporters believe all this garbage about vaccines. Vaccines are critically important. If we're going to get to what Dr. Fauci and the other experts say is herd immunity, we need 80% of the American people, young people, middle-aged people, older people, to be fully vaccinated. And if you have a huge chunk out there of Trump supporters or conservative Republicans who don't believe in the vaccine, that's a problem. Now, it's not just them. There are others as well. And in terms of some of the minorities, African Americans, they have a bad history with some of these vaccines. And so they're a little hesitant. They're a little reluctant too. And then there are simply anti-vaxxers who don't believe in vaccines. If you're asking me what our responsibility is as serious news organizations, our responsibility is to report the facts, say how important it is to get a vaccine, to give credit to those who came up within a year, came up with these vaccines, because normally it takes 5 or 10 years to get an approved vaccine for emergency use authorization. And you got to give the Trump administration some serious credit for devoting a lot of energy, a lot of money, a lot of resources to coming up with these vaccines. And I do give him credit for that. And I give the Biden administration a lot of credit for helping to deliver on that, 2-3 million doses a day, which is really, really important. The United States is doing well, but we still have a long way to go. And COVID is still a huge problem. And let's not lose sight of the fact that, we're going to be wearing masks, even if we're fully vaccinated, for quite a while. We're going to be socially distancing. We're going to be washing our hands. And we got to do it. And hopefully we'll get through this.
So on Fox, Tucker Carlson is singing a different tune and questioning the vaccine, and he has an enormous sway. He has been talked about as a potential presidential candidate. So I'd like to get your take on that. I mean, we've seen media personalities become presidents not so far in the past, and what you think of that idea. And also, when you have such a big media personality with such a huge audience, casting doubt on the vaccine, what should happen about what, not to him in particular, but how should that be handled? Because that is, you could argue, is a big public health problem.
Well, it's a free country. We have freedom of speech. We have a First Amendment, and everybody's entitled to say what they want to say. And if Fox News doesn't have a problem with Tucker saying those kinds of things, that's their right. They can do that if they want. Now, there are limits to free speech. You can't cry, scream in a crowded movie theater, fire, because that would be, illegal. But what can you do if that's what he believes, and that's what he's entitled to say based on his, those who are responsible at Fox News? He can do that. Does it worry me? And does it worry you? Of course, because he does have an enormous amount of clout. I think he's the highest rated, TV personality out there, at least on cable news right now. His show does really well on Fox News, and it's worrisome to hear that kind of stuff.
Is there anything that could be done, I don't know, from the FCC regarding the network and the Murdochs and anything along those lines? I mean, there used to be a fairness doctrine. I don't know if that would apply to this particular instance.
A lot of that applies to broadcast networks, but doesn't necessarily apply to cable networks. That those kinds of fairness issues.
There was no cable back then.
I know. So whether there's legally, is that what you're asking me? Is there anything legally that can be done to keep them quiet? Is that what you're saying?
Well, to do something along those lines where I guess you're right about this is not yelling fire in a crowded movie theater, but at the same time, it is spreading misinformation, untruths to a large segment of the population and imperiling the public health.
Well, the only thing we can do is just report the facts, how important vaccines are, and hopefully that'll get through. And as I say, I was encouraged yesterday that finally Trump came out and said he took a lot of credit, and he deserves some credit, obviously, for Operation Warp Speed and coming up with the development at NIH and elsewhere at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, FDA, and getting these vaccines to where they are right now. I'm happy he did that. Do I wish he would do more? Because he does have a lot of clout still with a lot of Republicans out there, and explaining how important, how life-saving it is to go out and get a vaccine. I don't know what you can do, in terms of telling Fox News or any other news organization they can't report this or that. I'm basically a free speech kind of guy.
Yeah. You have reported for many, many years, Washington inside and out. What is your take on the Republicans who know the truth about the presidential election, but still propagate and talk publicly about the quote unquote big lie? Why do you think they're doing it?
Well, first of all, many of them don't want to be on the wrong side of, or the other side of Trump. They see him still as maybe he's the most popular Republican still out there. He can get involved in the 2022 midterms, and let's see what happens in 2024. But it's a problem because a lot of them, and I know many of them, they understand what happened, that Biden won the election, that Christopher Wray, the FBI director, said it was a fair election, that there was no evidence that there was any wrongdoing that could have changed the results of the election. Even Bill Barr, the former attorney general, he said it was a free and fair election, and there was no evidence that whatever, if there were some, a little fraud, that it could have changed the result of the election. In Trump's interview yesterday or the other day on Fox, he was saying how Georgia, it was a disaster what happened in Georgia. Well, Georgia happens to have a Republican governor. Georgia happens to have a Republican lieutenant governor, who I interviewed on my show, The Situation Room, yesterday. Georgia happens to have a Republican secretary of state, and they did many recounts. They went through all the ballots, and they said there was no fraud, no corruption. The election was free and fair. The same in Arizona. Trump keeps complaining about Arizona. Well, there's a Republican governor in Arizona, and they all came up with the same conclusion, that the election in Arizona was free and fair. But what can you do? A lot of these politicians, they know that Biden won, but many of them are simply scared.
Okay, we have so many questions for you. I mean, we could go on and on and on. I'm seeing at least 99 in the list. So David has sent me a few of them. So let me just ask a few questions from the listeners. Beginning with ZK asking, please explain 2 things CNN should have done differently. Should CNN have been more demanding of Trump and his press office?
What we mean while he was president of the United States? I think we were pretty demanding of Trump. We were always asking him the toughest questions. Our White House correspondents, Jim Acosta was our chief White House correspondent. They tried to shut him out of the White House. They tried to take away his White House press credentials. It went to court. We won, but we were there. We were doing our job and reporting the news. We have a fact checker named Daniel Dale, who did an excellent job. Whenever Trump would give a speech or make a statement, they went through line by line and looked at all the factual, inaccuracies or lies or whatever you want to call it. Not just us, the Washington Post, the New York Times, all the major news organizations, NPR, they did that. And when he said something that wasn't true, we reported that. But I don't think we gave him a lot of freedom in terms of just spouting whatever he wanted.
What was election night like for you? When I watched it, and we all watched it as the night turned into days, just give us the behind the curtain peek into what that night was like for you.
It was, I spent most of that night, election night, if you were watching CNN with John King over at the Magic Wall, reporting on what was going on. Polls were closing in Florida. And then we would show the results of what was going on in Florida. Polls were closing in Ohio, in North Carolina, in all these states, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And it was reporting, and early in the evening, it looked like Trump was doing well, and he was doing well. But that's because in a lot of those states, they waited to release the absentee ballots, the mail-in ballots that they had. And we knew, because Trump was always railing against those, we knew that once those ballots came in, Biden would pick up and he would do much better, which of course was the case. And it took a few days for all of those ballots in several of those key battleground states to be counted. And so as a result, it wasn't until the election was on Tuesday, but it wasn't until that Saturday morning when we were confident enough, and we were the first news organization to do so. And I went on the air at I guess it must have been around 11 a.m. And I said, CNN now projects that that Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States. And then within a few minutes, all the other major news organizations, including, to their credit, Fox News, reported the same thing. And at that point, it was basically over. Although, of course, as we know, Trump never believed that. He railed against it. His supporters did as well. But by that Saturday morning, we were confident. And then they did the recounts in Pennsylvania, and Michigan, Wisconsin, in Georgia and Arizona, all the key battleground states, and the results were reaffirmed. The numbers changed a little bit as more ballots were counted, but basically everything that we reported turned out to be accurate. And then in mid-December, the Electoral College, all 50 states, they met and reaffirmed that Biden won and sent the ballots to Congress on January, it's supposed to be on January 6th, which we know what happened on January 6th as Congress, the House and Senate were counting the ballots. It was simply a procedural process, but we saw the insurrection, the assault on the US Capitol. To their credit, and I give Mike Pence, the vice president, a lot of credit for standing up to the president and officially affirming in the middle of the night that Biden won the election and was going to be the president of the United States on January 20th. And even after that, even after Mike Pence, the vice president, he's also the sitting president of the U.S. Senate, when he reaffirmed that, Trump never even accepted that. So he eventually left the White House, by January 20th. But to this day, he thinks he won, and won decisively, which he obviously didn't.
Given the fact that so many people do believe that Trump won the election, hopefully it's fewer now as time has passed, but there was a sizable chunk of the population who believed that. And I assume this is something you've never seen in all of your years reporting on presidential elections. But did that give you pause in terms of how you present the news and how you present the facts, and knowing that a sizable chunk of the population won't believe you no matter what you say. Have you given up on that chunk of the population? And
No, I have not given up on anyone.
do you think you can bring them back somehow?
I hope people will watch and listen and hear, and you know, obviously they're seeing what's going on right now. And I will point out, you know, I think it's important to point out that even though when he was president during those 4 years, Trump didn't give us an interview, I did sit down and interview the Vice President, Mike Pence. I interviewed almost all of the other top officials in the Trump administration, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and so many others. So they were willing to talk to us. And I just want to point out that was always good that they were. But you know, I'm an optimist. I think we live in the greatest country in the world. And I suspect that we've gone through some rough times over these many, many years, you know, of American history. And we come out of it, and eventually we emerge even stronger. So that's what I believe, and hopefully that'll be the case.
So you think that once things calm down, if they calm down, and Trump recedes into the background more, that you'll be able to get many of those people back to watching CNN, believing in what you report, and not,
I hope so.
not calling you fake news?
I hope so. Some of them probably won't. But you know what? It's a free country. If they want to watch CNN, if they want to watch MSNBC, if they want to watch Fox, if they want to watch CNBC or ABC, NBC, CBS, if they want to listen to NPR, it's a free country. They can do that. You know, we got a lot of different views out there, which is fine, and we'll be successful as the United States of America.
Right, but it does speak to how different people, how you know, from when you started doing the news to now, how different people view information, news, opinion, and this idea that perhaps this is the way it's going to be, ever more bifurcated, ever more split along various different interest lines.
Well, you know, I've been, and Zev Yaroslavsky, my old friend, he's, you know, my age. We've lived through tough periods in our country. We were in college during the Vietnam War. I suspect you weren't even born yet, but the country was so deeply divided. The protests, what was going on in the streets of Washington and all over the country, the demonstrations, it was pretty ugly, and we came through that. Watergate and Nixon, the country was very, very divided during Watergate when Nixon eventually, you know, resigned and moved on. But the country was deeply split. You know, we've had many, many divisive eras, periods in our country that have really deeply divided the American public. But as I say, this is a great country, and eventually we get through that and we move on, we learn lessons. And a lot of people, and maybe I'm overly optimistic, who were, you know, let's say early on, very, very pro-Nixon, eventually they switched when they got more information, and they realized, you know, what he was responsible for doing during Watergate, for example. And so they changed their attitudes. And I think all of us are fully capable of changing our views if we get more and more information. That's why I so believe in what we're doing, reporting responsibly the news. And as we say at CNN, facts first.
Stan asks, what do you view as the responsibility of social media to police lies and misstatements?
I think it's important because, you know, this is a relatively new phenomenon, what's going on in social media. And these are not, you know, journalists who, as I said earlier, who will check with an aggrieved, if you're attacking somebody, they're not going to check and say, well, what do you say? They say you're doing this. What do you, they just posting whatever they want. And a lot of people sadly believe a lot of the junk that's out there. And it's a serious problem. Now, if you're asking me what's the responsibility of Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or Google to be I think they have a responsibility to do more of what they've started doing now. And I welcome that.
Well, Facebook in particular is starting to take on vaccine deniers in a big way.
Which is important.
Yeah. Do you think that they should have done more regarding the big lie, election news, or is that?
I do, But, you know, I also believe in free speech, and especially when it comes to politics. A lot of different views out there, and let those views be aired. But when it comes to life and death issues like COVID and vaccines, I think that that is a serious, serious issue. And those of us who were covering here in Washington the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, and it was for me, and I've been around and I've covered wars and I've covered a huge stories. When I saw what was going on, when I saw the video, the anger, the crowds swarming, attacking the U.S. Congress, when I saw the the broken doors and the windows and the beating up of the police and scaling the walls of Capitol Hill, you know, I was hard for me to believe. I was reporting it live on CNN, but it was hard for me to believe what was going on. I said, this is the United States of America. Even to this day, almost every day, I want to drive around Capitol Hill. And it's so sad for me when I do it. I want to see if those fences with the razor wire atop the fences are still surrounding the whole Capitol. We're about to have cherry blossom time here in Washington, with hundreds of thousands of tourists come to Washington, see the nation's capital. But you can't get close to the Capitol Hill, to the Capitol complex, not just the main buildings, but the House and Senate office buildings, which are surrounding the Capitol, because there's these fences with armed National Guard troops all over the place and big heavy trucks blocking areas. And for someone who's lived in Washington for a long time and has seen, you know, what a beautiful city it is, and how people, not only Americans, but tourists from all over the world, can just walk around Capitol Hill and be inspired by our democracy, to see, you know, the enclosures, the security fences, everything that's still there to this day. It's a sad commentary on what has happened, and it pains me to see it. I understand why it's there, because, you know, you got 100 senators, 435 members of the House, a lot of staff people that are deeply concerned about their security.
Do you think it was right for Twitter to ban Donald Trump?
I'll leave that to Twitter. If that was their decision, I know that's, for Trump personally, extremely painful. But I mean, what they were doing was they were letting him post, but then they would issue a disclaimer saying this is not true, or whatever they were saying. But they decided, after doing that so often, they're just going to, you know, ban him from Twitter.
Do you foresee a Trump political dynasty? Even if he doesn't run again, do you think his children or children's?
I have no idea. They may decide to run. They may win, they may lose. I have no idea if Donald Trump Jr. or anybody else in the Trump family is going to run for office. And I have no idea if Trump in 2024 is going to run for, you know, try to get himself reelected.
Marcia asks, what has changed with Biden as president? How has it impacted what you do, your show? Well, the briefings at the White House, the Jen Psaki press secretary briefings every day, and they go on for about an hour. The COVID briefings that we get Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, very well organized, with a lot of substantive information with Dr. Fauci, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, and the whole team, Jeffrey Zients, Andy Slavitt. You know, they do a really good job in providing us with the factual information. I think that's very significant, and they have a lot of credibility. And I think it's good that Jen Psaki is answering a lot of questions every day from reporters. When I was a White House correspondent for CNN for 7 years during the Bill Clinton administration, you know, we had briefings almost every day, you know, with Mike McCurry when he was press secretary, you know, or you know, whatever. You know, they were always available to answer our questions. We had a little gaggle in the morning with the press secretaries, with Joe Lockhart and the others. And I see a lot of that coming back in this administration. And I think it's important that we have that kind of access as journalists to the newsmakers, to the executive branch, and of course, to the legislative branch as well. And Congress has always been pretty available. You know, we got our reporters like Manu Raju and others up on Capitol Hill that are always walking around getting questions to senators and representatives. And I think that's important. There's now a crisis at the border, and there seems to be a border crisis for every president. This one is particularly acute. Do you think the media is treating this crisis in the same, giving President Biden the same level of scrutiny as it did with President Trump.
Yes, I think we've been all over. I'm talking about the mainstream media, not just us, but all the major news organizations. What's going on? It's heartbreaking to see these little children separated from their parents, and the U.S. government under Biden's administration dealing with it in the way they're dealing with it. And they're getting plenty of criticism from the news media, the Biden people. It's a real serious problem that's going on right there. They're reluctant to call it a crisis, but it's a really, really awful situation. And you want to deal with this. And remember, people are coming in big numbers in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic. Have they been tested for COVID? And it's a huge problem, and they're trying to figure out how to deal with it. But I think we're covering it thoroughly. We've got a lot of reporters on the border right now from CNN, and I think we're doing an excellent job covering it.
Do you think, is the honeymoon over for Biden with the media?
I don't think in recent years there's been a long honeymoon for any of the presidents. The media is pretty thorough, pretty tough. We want to get the facts out there, and I think we've been pretty responsible. Look, he's a new president. Let's see how he does at that news conference next week. I thought the interview that George Stephanopoulos did this morning was very good.
Yeah, it was.
There was a lot of news in that interview, including President Biden saying he considers Russian President Putin a killer. And you notice the Russian embassy, the Russian ambassador in Washington was recalled in the aftermath of that interview. He's now heading back towards Moscow. These are serious issues that's going on right now. And what I also have been encouraged by, yesterday, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released this long report on election interference by foreign governments and made the case that Russia was mostly responsible. They didn't tamper with any election counting or anything like that, but they tried to influence the election to help Trump get reelected, to hurt Biden. And today, together with the Justice Department and the Department of Homeland Security, the ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, released another report about domestic extremism, white supremacists who are now the biggest domestic terrorist threat that the country is facing. And I think these reports, which have both been declassified, are very significant, very important. And I'm glad they're doing that because I believe in transparency. I want the American public, the American voters, the American people to have as much information as possible, to be as educated about these issues as possible. And when the government can release that kind of information, from the intelligence community and do it in a declassified way, I think that's significant.
During the last 4 years, there was so much coverage of Trump and his latest, attention-grabbing statements or what have you, or policies. Very little international news really made it to the forefront. And I'm wondering if you're expecting there to be more foreign coverage or more news from abroad now.
Well, I think I disagree with you. I think there was plenty of coverage of Trump's national security and foreign policy issues. When he would go and meet with Kim Jong-un of North Korea and talk about what great friends they are. When he would go to Europe and blast NATO, when he would blast China on an almost daily basis. That was a lot of foreign news. There was a lot of international news that we were reporting on. It wasn't all just domestic politics or anything like that. And I think there will be a lot of foreign news with the Biden administration. Remember, Biden's a former chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He loves foreign policy. He's going to meet with all these world leaders virtually or one maybe even in person. You got the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, who's there, Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense. They're both in Asia right now, in Korea and Japan, and they're talking about China. There's going to be more meetings with China, and Biden has already spoken with Putin. It was not necessarily a very pleasant conversation, but still. But I think there's a lot of foreign policy news that's going to be out there, and I agree. I disagree with you. I think there was a lot of foreign policy news during the 4 years of the Trump administration, which we covered very aggressively.
Well, I guess I meant not seeing it just through the lens of Trump. I suppose everything was filtered through the Trump lens, rather than these news stories being stories in and of their own right, without a Trump perspective on them.
Well, he was the president of the United States, so we had to report all that. But if you're talking about stories like what we've done, whether Arwa Damon did a great piece this week on what's going on, 10 years of the Syrian war and the heartache, what's going on, or in Myanmar, what's going on, or in Yemen, what's going on. Nima Al-Bagher has done amazing pieces. Clarissa Ward has done amazing pieces. But we were doing those kinds of pieces during the Trump years as well. One of the things that CNN is so good at doing, because we have CNN International, we have our correspondents all over the world, and we're devoted to reporting those kinds of stories. And I don't think anybody can compete with us as far as a television network is concerned in getting those stories out there and letting our viewers know what's going on in Asia or Africa or South America. And it was the dream of Ted Turner when he launched CNN. And I give Ted, who's a friend, he hired me, a lot of credit. And he told me when he hired me, he said, "Remember, Wolf, the news comes first." And he didn't only want CNN to be a US news organization. He wanted to be a global news organization. He wanted people all over the world to watch, and people all over the world are watching. My show, The Situation Room, airs on CNN and CNN International. So people in 240 countries and territories around the world are watching us. It's very exciting for those of us who love international news to know that we have a huge audience out there, not just in the US, but around the world.
Phyllis asks, what do you think will be the result of the Israeli elections this month?
Beats me. I don't know. They got a free and fair election. Let's see what happens. Democracy is good. I have no idea what's going to be the result.
I don't think anyone does, including.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people in this. They'll wait and they'll count the votes, and we'll find out.
They don't have you though on election night or the magic wall.
Yeah, they got plenty of good journalists in Israel for their TV networks and their newspapers. They know what they're doing.
All right, we've come to the end, and I can offer you a minute or so for closing remarks if you'd like to make any.
Let me thank you. Let me thank Zev, my old friend. Let me thank Mel and all of you for doing what you're doing. I think you're doing really important work. I think these programs that you have, I'm sure, are very informative to a lot of folks who are watching and listening. And it's been a pleasure of mine to be part of it. And one of these days, hopefully, we can all do this in person. Not yet. We still got COVID out there, but we'll do it. I like to say when I'm doing these, you see the sign behind me, Madeleine. You see what that says?
Well, I can barely read it because.
Try to read it. See what you can see.
The Situation Room.
All right, that's enough. It says The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer. But when I'm doing these programs with you, I like to say, I'm Wolf Blitzer, and you're in the Situation Zoom.
That is where we all are. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. I know you're very busy, and thank you for your remarks and your insights. Much, much appreciated. And thank you all for tuning in for this past hour in the Situation Zoom. Next week, tune in to see Pat Morrison. She will be the interlocutor, and she will be talking with David Brooks, and that should be a fascinating conversation. Pat Morrison and David Brooks, The Road to Revival, America in 2021. So thank you so much for being here with me. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Be safe, be well, and I'll see you next time. Bye.